I remember them being aware of something that happened in the news where a Black man had been killed.
Mm,
You have to couch that conversation in wording that communicates to them without them then being afraid, because we don't want our children to walk in fear. There's no need for
absolutely.
that. My father, Dr. Tony Evans, he sat down with his grandsons and he said, let me tell you that despite the PhD, the reality is I have still been pulled over because
Mm.
I'm Black.
How do you balance, ministry and family life? Are there any parameters you set up, or just how do you balance that? Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video on this channel. My name is Chase, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you guys that I had with Priscilla Shirer last week. If you don't know who Priscilla is, first of all, where you been? She's an author, a speaker, an actress, former Dallas Theological Seminary graduate, and so we've got that connection right there. And I'm just so excited to share this conversation. And one of the things that we talked about, probably the title of this video, was about raising Black boys in 2020. And that's not all we talked about, but I think this conversation is so important to have because there's a side to raising minority children, specifically boys, Black boys, that those who are not raising Black boys might not fully understand. My hope is that for those of you who are raising Black boys now or will be in the future, that this will be an encouragement to you. And for those of you who are not in that boat, maybe this might just give you a different perspective and allow you to kind of listen in on a conversation that we had about that. Not just that, about other things as well. So I'm gonna stop talking. I'm just gonna go ahead and play this conversation. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Hey, well, thank you guys for tuning in to another video on this channel. I'm really excited about today. We've got a special guest here on this channel, and she is Priscilla Shirer. So thank you for joining us on this channel this week.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been kind of admiring you and celebrating what you and your wife are doing for
Oh,
quite a
man.
while from afar. So it's great to have an opportunity to talk to you today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, I will have just given you an introduction while this is playing, but how would you introduce yourself? Who is Priscilla Shirer in your own words?
Well, man, mostly, mostly I have the opportunity to be a wife and a mom as my main privilege and joy and job. Let me tell you that feeding these three sons that I have is a
Oh,
full-time
man,
job.
I believe
Yeah.
it. What
So
ages?
yeah, I have my oldest son's getting ready to be 18 in a couple months.
Oh, wow.
And then I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Okay.
So just in the rhythms of what that entails, having
Right.
football players and basketball players in school and all the things. Jerry and I have been married for 21 years,
Oh, wow.
which I
Congratulations.
cannot even believe. Thanks. And so it seems like the time is rolling past. So I get to the pleasure of investing myself fully in that. And then, I do love the Lord. I've been in relationship with Jesus since I was about 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
And unbeknownst to me, the plan that he would have for my life would be ministry. That's not what I thought that I'd be doing with my life, but in
Right.
my early 20s, the Lord started making that clear. And so, man, that's been an adventure that I couldn't have created if I'd even tried to create it. The many
Right.
ways that he's given us opportunity to share Jesus with people and to equip the church and strengthen the church to live in victory.
Absolutely. And we're both DTS people, right? So when did
We are
when did you finish up at DTS?
99.
99. Okay.
I'm afraid to ask you when you finished up.
So I finished up in 2017. Right.
Oh,
I
Lord.
knew. Actually,
Oh,
wait,
my
actually,
God.
no, 2018, actually. So.
Oh, you're a baby.
Right,
You're a
right,
baby.
exactly. Yes, I've only been out for a couple years, and then just moved back up here to Ohio, and yeah, so it's been I can't thank DTS enough for preparing for ministry and all of that.
Yeah. And the way that even the school has changed so much in those
Mhm.
20 years, the way that some of the class structures have changed, the
Yeah.
way that some of the broadened of perspective, the breadth of perspective
Yep.
on theology
Yep.
and all of that has changed so much from 99 to 2018
Absolutely.
when you
Absolutely.
graduated, which has
Absolutely.
been great.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So are you still you're still living down in Texas, right?
Yeah, I live in Dallas. I've been here my whole life, other than the 4 years that I went to the University of Houston.
Okay.
Then I just came back, went to Dallas Seminary, and am still here.
Awesome. So are you there right now currently?
Yes, I'm in
Yeah,
Dallas right now.
yeah. How's the heat? I've been hearing about all the heat waves and.
Listen, it's ridiculous, is what it is. But I will say that overall, this summer has been a little bit more gentle than some
Okay.
summers have been, because sometimes we just get 100-degree weather for, like a 2-month
Right.
stretch.
Exactly.
And it kind of waited until just August. Before August, we didn't have a bunch of triple digits. So I'm honestly grateful that it's just been the past 2 weeks of 100 degrees. Hopefully, as September comes, we'll start to go back down quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. People ask me all the time, do you miss Dallas? And I loved my time in Dallas so much, but I don't miss it in August.
I know it's stupid. It is
Right.
just stupid.
It really is. But then we get it on the other end here in February when it's, -10 for a month.
You're
So
in Ohio, correct?
yeah, yep,
Yeah.
yep. So awesome. Well, hey, let's jump into it. So one of the things that I wanted to hit on, and this will probably be something along the lines of the title of this video, was about raising black boys in America, specifically in 2020, right? And so that's something that you've had experience with. I was raised a black boy, right? So I've kind of been on the other side of that. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And so first of all, for anyone watching, how would you tell them how is raising a black child, or specifically a black boy, different? What are some differences that you might have had to go through that other people who are not raising black children, and
Yeah.
specifically black boys, would have to go
Well, I
through?
really appreciate that question, because honestly, that is one of the things, particularly now with all of the unrest and the heightened need for people to be informed about this over the last few months. That's one of the conversations that I have with some of my white girlfriends that are raising their children as well. It's that question: what are the differences? And I'm able to share with them that, number one, there are differences. And that's one of the eye opening things that I don't think a lot of, even our brothers and sisters that are of the lighter complexion know, that a lot of the things that we want to instill in our children, integrity, a love for the scriptures, a desire to follow God with their lives, all of those things are in line with each other. Just being good citizens, all that stuff, that's in line with each other. But there is going to come a point when the training and the caution and the awareness that I need to bring to my children is going to steer away from what they're having to tell theirs.
Absolutely.
So their eyes are open to the fact that, yeah, with my black boys, I'm having to make sure that they are aware of the fact that there is a thread of racism that runs through, certain people's mindsets in a way that sometimes they're even unconscious of until they come in contact with you.
Yeah.
There is a perception that they will have based on your size. My children my boys are big boys. They've been big for a long time.
You
So they're
mentioned
big
football.
boys. That's right. So they're really big boys. And in environments where they're not known, you have to be aware that people are going to have a perception of who you are just based on what they see. And so you have to be aware of that you're going to run into some people who don't even know they have a bias until they see you.
Right.
And then they might react in a way, even just covert, small ways that are indicators that they have that bias. So I do have to tell my children about the cautions and the warnings of being Black in America. And I feel concerned about my counterparts, other men and women who want to suggest that there's no need for me to train my sons in that way or to give them any insight in that way. That's a fallacy. There is a need. And so that is something that has been a part of my parenting of my sons.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm the oldest of six. And so there's 3 boys as well, and then 3 girls. And so we've had a lot of these similar conversations, and it's been interesting being the oldest, seeing my younger siblings kind of begin to realize their own Blackness as well. Because it's an aspect of my identity that I really wrestled with until probably college. Have you had to walk through difficult moments like with your kids where they realized, hey, I'm Black and this is what this means?
Yeah, there have been a couple of times. Obviously, now our young people are growing up in a time period where culture is celebrated. There is direct, constant affirmation, which I'm so grateful of, because that hasn't always been the case. Where that whether the texture of our hair or the complexion of our skin or the cultural expressions that we have, they haven't been celebrated necessarily in previous decades. Obviously, many decades past, they were even looked upon in derogatory fashions. But even when I was coming up, they weren't necessarily overtly looked upon negatively. It's just that they weren't celebrated. But
Yeah,
now my boys are coming up in a time where being Black is, people are celebrating all that
absolutely.
means. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad about that for them. But yeah, there have been occasions where, in overt ways, they have just been made to feel like they are not a part of the group. So
Yeah.
they're just sort of standing on the outside of this group, and having to talk with them through why that is, and what that means, but encouraging them to find value in the uniqueness of who God created them to be. In other words, you don't have to now become something different or try to quiet who you are so that you can fit into that group.
That's good.
You can just be fully who you are. The image of God is stamped on you, both in your personality and your physicality. So you can just be fully who God has called you to be, and trust Him for that gap that still very often exists between us and others that we are in relationship with. I got to tell you too,
Yeah.
I take every opportunity, when my boys' friends are here, they have Black friends, white friends, Hispanic friends. When their friends come over, when these conversations come up, I find, as a mother of Black sons, that it is also my joy and my responsibility to make sure that their friends are aware of the discussions that I have to have with my sons. If
That's
you're
good.
my son's friend, then you need to be aware of the fact that his reality in certain ways is different from
That's good.
yours.
Absolutely.
So we do have conversations that I think opens the eyes of those friends, those teenagers that come into our home and into our context. We have conversations where they can be made aware of the realities that are a part of our lives.
That's good. That's huge. And my dad used to call those Christopher Columbus moments when he'd say we discovered America, and then we'd which I know that's a whole nother conversation about. But we used to have those family conversations a lot. When we'd come home and had an experience, whether it was at school or with friends, and so my parents were really good at making sure that we knew what it meant to be Black in America as well. Was there a time when can you trace it back to like a first time that you had the talk about being Black in America with them, or
With
did
my
it?
sons, um, I think, gosh, I cannot remember now exactly which instance it was. Um, but I remember my boys being aware. This had to be now 10 years ago. I remember them being aware of something that happened in the news where a Black man had been killed.
Mm,
And I don't know if they overheard a discussion between me and their dad and some other adults that were over, but it came up later just over dinner. They had
yeah.
questions about it. And at the time, my oldest now was just getting ready to be 18. So at the time, he might have been 10.
Okay.
And then our middle child was maybe 8 years old. And so, you have to couch that conversation in wording that communicates to them without them then being afraid, because we don't want our children to walk in fear. There's no need for
Absolutely.
that. But at the same time, we can't hide the reality. So I remember sitting around the table at dinner and having to talk through, and mostly their dad really took that on. I was so grateful for that, hearing this and watching this Black man talk to his Black sons and say, here's who you are, here's
Mm,
who I am, here's the history that we have in this country, and how the threads of that are still prevalent in the lives that we are living today. So he had that full on conversation without sort of sugarcoating the reality of what that means, but
right.
being very careful to also remind them that they don't need to be afraid,
Yeah.
that God is with them, and that that they can be who God has called them to be, knowing that God's got their back. So I loved the conversation, the balance between the reality, but also who we are as people of God.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our daughter's 3. And so we've just, so my wife is white. And so we've just introduced the concepts of race, right. And started talking through, what it means that daddy is Black and mommy is white, and
Yeah.
what race is, where we haven't dipped our toes into the racism waters yet. We still got a little
Yeah.
bit of time, hopefully, for that. But, I know that that's a conversation that's going to be coming pretty soon. What did,
Well, and it's interesting too. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt
go
you.
for it. Go for it.
It's interesting too that a friend of mine, a white friend of mine, asked me, "What is it that I felt like they needed to do, and how they needed to be responsible with this conversation in regards to their kids?" And I said, "The main thing you can do is make your children aware,
Mm.
because when you say to your children, when you say to me, they would say to me, there are some conversations they didn't feel comfortable having yet because their children were too young, and it might be too much for them to handle, or they didn't want to show them these images." And I said to them, "Do you realize that the fact that you can say that is actually in and of itself, a privilege?
Yeah,
That I
yeah,
don't have the
absolutely.
privilege of not letting my 7-year-old see the images or know about
Exactly.
this conversation. He's got to know, because this is he's being raised as a Black boy in America. So the fact that your kid doesn't have to know,
Yeah,
that's a privilege." So I
absolutely.
said, the first thing you can do in being respectful of this entire situation is tell your kids, so that they're aware of what their friends are seeing and are having to live with.
Exactly, exactly. So now that your kids are, you said the oldest is 18, the youngest is 12, you said?
Yes, he's going to be 12 in a month. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So how have how has the conversation shifted as they've gotten older? Or has it kind of remained the same over the years?
Well, in some ways, it's shifted. The dynamic has changed because they just have more of an awareness now of social justice, of what it means to be careful about not just talking about it, but actually putting action to words. How do
Right,
we help? How do we enforce change? How do we bring, the gospel to bear in this? So the conversation is broadened just because they're able to really internalize and absorb just a bit more of what it would mean for them. So yeah, the conversation is deepened, and I'm grateful for that. I'm watching them wrestle through what it means to be a Christian,
yeah,
to really believe the full expression of the good news, and how they're supposed to walk that out, um, and be fully Black,
yeah,
and be okay in their cultural expression, and knowing that that does not in any way need to be diminished in order for their faith to be respected and honored, and primary in
right.
their lives. So I'm
That's
just
awesome.
watching them sort of balance that out just a
That's
little
really
bit, and it's
cool.
really cool actually to start talking to them like they full grown adults.
Right, right, exactly. Our 3-year-old thinks she's fully grown.
I know, right?
One other question about the raising Black boys. How important would you say are role models? And are there any role models that you or your husband have kind of introduced them to and put into their lives?
Well, gratefully in our family, we have a bunch of Black men that are able to tell them stories of when they've experienced racism. My father, Dr. Tony Evans, he sat down with his grandsons and he said, "Let me tell you that despite the PhD, despite the success in ministry, despite the invitations to speak all over the world and to masses amount of people, the reality is I have still been pulled over because
Mm,
I'm Black. I
yeah,
wasn't speeding. I was just in the wrong neighborhood, in the wrong kind of car." And so there was concern about that. So it didn't matter all of the things that I had accumulated in my life in terms of knowledge, or in terms of in his case notoriety. That didn't matter. I'm still in Black skin.
right.
So being able to have men like that, and then of course their dad, and they have uncles as well who are able to tell them stories of things that they faced, and then watch them talk with their dad and uncles about that, and grandfathers about that. That has been unbelievable. It's been
Yeah,
unbelievable. And that's one of the ways that I think that the church needs to step in as surrogate parents, so that there are in single parent homes, maybe where a mother is raising her children without that influence of manhood. That's what the church is. It's a family. It's for surrogate fathers and brothers and uncles and grandfathers to step in and be able to help walk our young men and women through this.
absolutely, absolutely. That's awesome. Hey, well, I want to kind of take it a little bit of a different route. And so you mentioned, your family and how they have so many role models to look up to, and you grew up in a ministry family. Right, and you know about all the stereotypes with pastors' kids and missionaries' kids and all that. Like, how were you able, you and your siblings, able to stay grounded while growing up in a ministry family when we see so many kids who the opposite is true?
Well, We didn't have a very opulent, upbringing or anything. Sometimes, I've seen a few episodes of like Greenleaf, and I'm watching Greenleaf, and I'm thinking, oh, our life didn't look like this at all. So there wasn't a lot of opulence to it at
Yeah.
all. My parents actually still live in the exact same house that they raised us in.
Oh, wow.
It's a little small house, 4-bedroom home,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
40 years old. So we just were raised very humbly. And that's just my parents' MO is that, again, he still lives in the same house. My mom just went home to be with the Lord 8 months ago, but they've been in the same house all these years. And we just were all in ministry together. So we didn't, as teenagers, we didn't necessarily like that all the time, but we
Yeah.
were just all in. There was never this separation of the pastor's family from the rest of the church. We just were a part of the church. We served with everybody else. Dad was always extremely accessible, still is accessible to people. I think when folks visit our church, they are actually shocked that he's just standing right there.
Right,
Just
right, exactly.
talk to people and meet people and
Yeah.
hang out with people. So I just didn't grow up with this distance between the pastor's family and everybody else.
Gotcha.
We just always felt like we were a part of the church.
That's awesome.
And I remember my mother would say to us very often that she would say, you are not responsible to everybody that is in this church. You're our children. You're not the church's children.
Yeah.
So you don't have to impress them, please them, make them happy in any sort of way. You're responsible to the Lord, and you're responsible to us because we're your parents. So we took that to heart. We knew we were in a fishbowl, particularly as my dad's ministry got larger and larger, particularly in the early 90s. The early to late 90s, and then into the 2000s was, the Promise Keepers height. Yeah. And so everywhere we went, everybody knew who our dad was. So we knew we were in a fishbowl, but my parents just kept continually letting us relax, be who we are, make mistakes. We got in trouble. We were just teenagers, enjoyed our life, and we just didn't feel like we had to live up to everybody else's expectations. And when they put them on us, I remember my mom talking to them directly and saying, take your hands off my children.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. The fact that they're not the church's children, they're, you are your parents' children. And that's something my wife and I have been talking about a lot, just again, with our daughter being 3 and just about to launch this church and what that's going to look like to raise her as well, which kind of leads to the last question that I wanted to ask you. How, being in ministry, how do you balance, ministry and family life? And how do you, are there any parameters you set up, or just how do you balance that?
Yeah. Well, one more thing I want to say too about the previous one, and then I'll answer that.
Yeah, go for it.
I wanted to say too that, my parents also reminded us of the privilege that it is to be in ministry, and that God knew that we would be entrusted to them, that we would be their kids, and that they would be in full-time ministry. Wow. So they made it feel like it was a mantle of our family to have the privilege to be in ministry together. So again, we didn't always feel like it was a privilege. It's not, I'm not saying we just all frolicked through it and thought it was amazing all the time, but we kind of grew up with that mindset that God gave us this privilege. That is kind of leads into what, you're asking me now about how I'm balancing it with my own children. Now that I've got these teenagers, it's kind of the same as when I was a teenager. I remember not feeling like it was a privilege and kind of feeling like, do we have to go to church again? What?
Right.
So I'm trying to balance that now, being engaged in my kids' worlds, their Fortnite world and football games and all the stuff that they like, just being invested in what they like and not it just all being about what we like. That's what I remember, or what we're doing. That's what I remember about growing up. My parents were all up in our stuff, track meets and cheerleading and football games and soccer, and they were in our lives. All of our friends came to our house, and they would have the parties, and, the youth group would come over, and it wasn't just about doing ministry. It was about enjoying life.
That's awesome.
So we're trying to do that with our kids now, certainly not doing it perfectly. We feel like we're stumbling along, as all parents do, I guess, when you're just trying to, do your best.
Yep.
But
especially in 2020.
Yeah, right. So I'm just trying to help our kids see that life is meant to be enjoyed, and that following Jesus isn't a drudgery, that ministry is not a job, it's just an outworking of a life that we're living anyway. Um, but obviously that's changed from year to year as they've gotten older. It looked one way when they were toddlers, and so as we gone through each stage of life, what it looks like to balance it out has been different. It's been one of the things that has kept me on my face before the Lord. It's like, okay, Lord, I feel like we just got some balance, and now a new year has come, new obligations, new responsibilities,
Right.
a new year in marriage, which means there's new relational dynamics we're trying to figure out.
Absolutely.
So Lord, would you help me and help us to hear your voice about what it looks like to align our lives in a way that will honor you, at least for this season, and then be willing and have the courage to say no to all the other stuff that's going to pull us away from these priorities.
Absolutely.
So honestly, Chase, that's what it's looked like. It's looked like me saying, okay, Lord, I know you've called me to be a wife and a mother. I know you would not have me neglect those things in order to build some ministry. That's not what you would ask me to do.
Absolutely.
So as I look at the year ahead, or the the semester ahead, let me honor these priorities, and then I can filter in everything else around these priorities. Anything that don't fit, it's just a no. So I say no a whole lot.
Yep.
But every no is a simultaneous yes. It means I get to honor God's priorities, and I can do that without fear or guilt, because I know that when I honor God's priorities to the best of my abilities, not perfectly, but when I honor them and I take care of his business, he'll take care of my business.
That's awesome. And it kind of reminds me, I was listening to a podcast a little while ago with Ed Stetzer, and he was talking about strengthening our no muscles when being in ministry. And it's not easy. It's not easy. But
but we can exhaust ourselves doing a whole bunch of good stuff that has nothing to do with the things God has actually assigned for us to do. I remember Anne Graham Lotz. I was 24, and Anne Graham Lotz walked over to me at this conference. Anne Graham Lotz is one of the daughters of Billy Graham. Mm-hmm. She walked over to me. I'd never met her before. She walked over to me and she said, "Priscilla, I want you to know that I know who your daddy is, and I know you know who my daddy is." And I remember sitting there thinking, I know you're not comparing my daddy to your daddy, man. But she said, "I just want you to know that whatever God calls you to do, and whatever God calls me to do, it may or may not look anything like what our dads have been called to do." And she looked around her at the time. We were standing at a conference where there were all these people who had radio ministries and books and all that stuff. And she said, half of these people may get to heaven and find out they were not even on the front lines of doing what God called them to do, because they were just trying to pattern their ministries after somebody else. Mm-hmm. So she said, I want to encourage you right now, while you're 24 years old, that whether God calls you to 3 million people, like he's called our dads, or whether he calls us to 3 people, she said, I want you to do whatever he calls you to do, to his glory and with the full expression of your time, your talents, your treasures. Do it full on. Just be on the front lines of what he's called you to do. Yeah. And so I've used that as my guiding force, or guiding sort of compass for the past 20 years. Lord, what are the front lines? Absolutely. Let me just be on the front lines. It doesn't mean bigger. It just means this is what you have for me. Yeah. And I want to do that to the glory of God.
Oh man, that's awesome. And just to show that you really mean what you're saying, I was really blown away by when I asked you, to be on this. The first thing you said is, let me pray about it, right? Prayer is at the center of the driving motivation for ministry there. And so just a testament to the fact that you're really walking the walk that you're talking, right?
Oh. Well, hoping to honor God, as best we can. And again, it's one of those things that you look back sometimes in hindsight and you're like, I could have done better with that right there. But, the great thing about God is that his grace makes it so that even our mistakes in trying to honor him become our best teachers for the future as we keep moving forward. Absolutely. In our relationship with God. And I felt so thrilled to be able to do this with you, because like I said, someone sent me a clip of something you had done a couple of years ago. I watched it and I thought, I like this dude. I like this dude. You're willing to tackle really hard stuff. Absolutely. And to be brave and to just speak truth to people. And I just really appreciate that about you. And
thank you.
And also watching you start a church, I know what that means, to watch people plant a church, to start it, There's nothing glamorous or flashy about that. It's just the hard work of wanting to honor God and shepherding people. And so I feel really blessed to have an opportunity to talk to you too.
Oh, thank you so much. So where can people find you, and any upcoming projects you want to plug, or any where can people get a hold of you?
You know, I'm always writing. So I've just finished a Bible study on Elijah. Faith and Fire is the subtitle. And now more than ever, man, in our post-Christian culture, we're going to need the spirit of Elijah to stand up as sometimes what will be the lone voice in the midst of a culture that is setting the worship of God alongside the worship of other things. To be able to be the voice that says, no, there still is only one God. There still is only one name. And his name is Jesus Christ. And to do that without apology is going to take a lot of courage, and more increasingly in this day and age. And so I've written Elijah, that'll be out in January. Awesome. But on social media, I'm just at Priscilla Shirer, and hoping that our ministry will be a blessing to people.
Awesome. Well, I'll link to your Twitter and all that sort of stuff in the description, so you guys can check that out and be on the lookout for, what's it called? Elijah?
Elijah, Faith and Fire.
Elijah, Faith and Fire, coming out in January. Looking forward to it. Hey, well, thank you for jumping on here with me, and it's been a pleasure, just like you said, to meet face to face finally.
Yes.
Hey, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I post new videos like this every single week, and we're narrowing in on our family vlog number 100. So just next week, hopefully, Lord willing, we'll hit number 100. So make sure you hit the subscribe button. And also, I'd love to know what you thought about this conversation, whether you agreed with us, whether you disagreed with everything we said. I'd love to know what you thought about the conversation, and maybe kind of what stuck out to you from the conversation that we had. But thanks for watching this video, and as always, I'll see you on another video.